everybody, I'm Dana Bash in for Brooke Baldwin, and any moment now we are waiting for a White House briefing. It's going to begin, should be momentarily, as the president unleashes a new level of aggression against two of the world's powerhouses, Russia and China. But while billions of dollars in tariffs are still just threats against China, the administration is unequivocally going after Vladimir Putin and some of his closest and wealthiest allies. That includes the Russian president's reported former son-in-law, the one who is not in that picture, and an oligarch who has close ties with President Trump's former campaign chairman, Paul Manafort. While we wait for the briefing, let's talk about what all this means with our own Kara Scannell. Kara, thank you so much. First of all, let's break it down. Who are these sanctions against?
So it's a number of people who are, the oligarchs, and you can't be an oligarch in Russia unless you kind of have the pre-approval of Vladimir Putin. So they're in charge of some of the most important, biggest industries like aluminum and energy. And so some of these oligarchs on this sanctioned list also overlap with some of the actors in the Mueller investigation. And one of those is Oleg Deripaska. He's the head of one of the largest aluminum companies in the world. Now, he'd invested with Paul Manafort and Rick Gates in a failed Ukrainian cable deal about 10 years ago. And 2 weeks before Trump received the Republican nomination, Manafort had reached out through an intermediary to Deripaska to ask him if he wanted any private briefings. That's according to the Washington Post. We don't know if Deripaska ever got that briefing. But Rick Gates has now pleaded guilty, and he's cooperating with this investigation. And this is all about money. I mean, a universal factor about all these oligarchs is they have a lot of money. A lot of them come to the U.S. A lot of them have American friends and counterparts. And one thing Mueller's looking at is how money flowed from Russia potentially into the campaign. So that's where a lot of these individuals really come into play.
And you mentioned the sort of nexus here of these sanctions and the Mueller investigation. What do you think that this tells us about how deep the Trump administration thinks that the Mueller investigation is going into the ties that the campaign might have had?
Well, I mean, our reporting is that, we know that there are a lot of questions being asked about relationships and money flows. And we know that Mueller's investigators have stopped several oligarchs, at least two at the airport, in wanting to ask them questions about campaign financing. Two other ones that we know that are on this list that interact and overlap with people are this guy, Victor Vekselberg. He runs one of the largest energy companies. He attended this controversial dinner in Moscow that Michael Flynn was at, where Michael Flynn sat next to Vladimir Putin. We know that Flynn is cooperating as part of the Mueller investigation. And another one is Alexander Torshin. He is trying to build the parallel to the NRA in Russia. He is an annual attendee of the convention, and he'd made an overture to the Trump campaign to try to set up a meeting. So there's a lot of overlap and nexus and connections there, which is not surprising. We'd see Mueller potentially be interested in this, but it's interesting to see them end up on the sanctions list now.
It sure is, especially after, in all fairness, especially after the Trump administration has been criticized by both parties for not doing enough to punish those who they believe potentially had connections to the Trump campaign and also potentially involved in meddling in U.S. elections. Kara, thank you so much for that. And a short time ago, CNN's Richard Quest spoke with one of those Russians hit by sanctions. Russian bank CEO Andrei Kostin says it's all a misunderstanding by the U.S. government.
I did nothing wrong to America, to American interests. I was always trying to promote good business relationship with American banks, with American investors. So I'm punished because American administration considers that the Russian government conducting the wrong policy, and it's very unfortunate. It showed the very high level of misunderstanding on part of the American administration of the intention of the Russian government, of the Russian leadership. That's very unfortunate. I think we should stop somewhere because we are going from bad to worse, and if not for us, but for the sake of our children, who definitely deserve the better world and peaceful world, we should stop somewhere. So I don't have any feeling of revenge. I don't even recommend my government to retaliate because we already had tit-for-tat expulsion of diplomats. Now there's a sanction against Russian businessmen, including the private ones. I think we should stop somewhere and start to rebuild our relationship.
Now, one of the 7 Russian billionaires Kara and I were just talking about hit with these sanctions has ties to both Vladimir Putin and Paul Manafort. And CNN's Matthew Chance tracked down Oleg Deripaska, an aluminum magnate whom Manafort may have owed millions of dollars.
Did he owe you millions of dollars?
It's a news for idiots, if you don't understand.
Did he offer those private briefings to you as a way to try and repay that debt, Mr. Deripaska? Can you just ask me that, please? It's a big issue in the United States, sir. Did he offer you those private briefings to try and repay some of that debt to you? Is that why he offered them?
Get lost, please. Thank you.
Nice try, Matthew. Get lost. Pretty clear there. No issue with that translation. What do we know about this tycoon?
First of all, I know that it makes me wince every time I see that played again and again. But I mean, he's such a difficult character to get a hold of. He's media shy. He doesn't like being interviewed, and for good reason. I mean, this is a man who is deeply controversial. He's very close to Vladimir Putin. He was standing right behind Vladimir Putin when I accosted him at that event. It was the APEC summit in Da Nang in Vietnam, and it's really interesting to see what the U.S. Treasury has to say about him. I mean, some astonishing words they're using to describe Oleg Deripaska. They say he's been accused of threatening the lives of business rivals, illegally wiretapping a government official, taking part in extortion and racketeering. Where does it say this? Yes, he's alleged to have ordered the murder of a businessman, and he has links to organised crime. So this is not a figure who is particularly savoury and not somebody who should be necessarily messed with, and which is why, of course, he was so reluctant to answer the questions, legitimate questions that I was putting to him last year.
Absolutely. Now, the question, given all of the connections that he has to Vladimir Putin, is what do you think he is going to do? How do you think Vladimir Putin is going to react to these sanctions?
Well, it's difficult to say, isn't it? But undoubtedly, this list of sanctions that the US Treasury Department has put out is targeted at those individuals who are very, very close indeed to Vladimir Putin. I mean, Oleg Deripaska is perhaps Putin's favourite oligarch, but there are others on the list that are close to Putin, particularly Kirill Shamalov. Viewers may not have heard of him, but he is the son of one of Putin's closest friends, and he's also said to be Putin's son-in-law, although there are other reports that he recently got divorced from Putin's daughter, but nevertheless sort of a family member virtually. And so there's no question that this list of individuals is targeted at those very close around Putin himself and in his inner circle. Other people on the list close to him as well. In terms of what Putin will do, it's very unpredictable. We heard that call from Andrei Kostin for nothing to be done, for this to end. But in the past, Putin has downsized the American diplomatic mission here. He's expelled American diplomats. He could undertake all sorts of other possible sort of revenge measures as well. And so it's going to be a very interesting and it's a very dangerous period that we're currently in, I think.
Absolutely, very unpredictable. Of course, he also cracked down on American adoptions in Russia. We'll watch for that. Matthew, I know you're going to be on top of it. Thank you so much for that report. We have a lot to discuss here, including how these sanctions tie into the Mueller investigation, as we've been discussing, and the timing of this announcement. Why now? And will this slow Russia meddling in U.S. elections this year? My panel is standing by as we await the White House briefing any moment now. Also, President Trump defends his embattled EPA chief, Scott Pruitt, calling him a, quote, good man, why some say that phrase could be the kiss of death